My brother never believed in my business. When I started it, he called it a phase. Said I'd be back asking for a real job in 6 months. He never invested, never promoted it, never even asked how it was going. But the moment it started making real money, he asked for 51%. Not advice, not partnership, control. He said it calmly, like it was obvious, like I should be grateful he was even interested. And the worst part? For a second, I almost agreed. Because when someone has been above you your whole life, you don't immediately question their authority. You question yourself. So I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I sent him a contract, offering 1%. My brother is 4 years older than me. And when you're a kid, 4 years isn't a gap. It's a ranking system. He was always ahead of me in a way that felt permanent. When I was in middle school, he was already in high school. When I got to high school, he was already driving. When I started thinking about college, he was already talking about internships. He was never just older. He was established. And I was catching up. At family gatherings, people would ask him about his plans. What are you majoring in? Where are you applying? What's your 5-year plan? When it came to me, it was softer. How's school? You still drawing? You'll figure it out. It wasn't malicious. That's what makes it complicated. Nobody sat me down and said I was less capable. It was just understood that he was the benchmark, and I adjusted myself around that without realizing it. He spoke with certainty. I spoke carefully. He debated. I explained. If we disagreed about something, my parents would say, "Listen to your brother. He's been through it already." Eventually, you stop checking whether he's actually right. You just assume he probably is. And he wasn't a bad brother. He didn't bully me. He didn't sabotage me. He just corrected me. Constantly. If I told a story, he'd fill in details I didn't ask him to. If I shared an opinion, he'd refine it like I'd handed him a rough draft. If I was excited about something, he'd ask practical questions that slowly drained the excitement out of it. Have you thought about the risks? What's your backup plan? Is that realistic? It always sounded responsible, measured, protective, and I told myself that's what it was. But over time, something subtle happened. I stopped bringing ideas to him for support. I brought them for evaluation, and that changes you. When I graduated college, I took the safe job. Corporate, predictable, stable. He approved of that. You could hear it in his tone. Good. Build experience first. Then maybe you can experiment. Experiment. That word again. Like my ambition was a hobby I needed supervision for. The truth is, I stayed in that job longer than I wanted to. Not because I loved it, but because it made sense to him. And some part of me still wanted his approval. That's the part people don't talk about. You could be an adult, pay your own bills, make your own decisions, and still quietly want your older sibling to look at you and think, okay, he's solid. So when I started building my business on the side, I didn't tell him right away. I didn't want the questions. I didn't want the head tilt. I didn't want to feel like I was pitching a school project. For almost a year, I worked on it quietly. Late nights, weekends, learning things I'd never tried before. And when I finally quit my job to do it full time, I told him like it was already done. Not like I was asking for permission. He went quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, "You sure you're built for that?" Not in a mocking way, in a clinical way, like he was assessing my risk tolerance. I explained my plan, the clients I had lined up, the runway I'd saved. He nodded slowly. "Just don't be emotional about it," he said. "If it fails, it fails. Don't let pride keep you in too long." That sentence stuck with me, because it wasn't support. It was prediction. And when the business struggled in the beginning, which it did, he'd check in every few weeks. "How's the project?" Project. Not company. Not business. Project. I'd update him. Carefully. Strategically. If something went well, I'd downplay it. If something went wrong, I'd own it fast so he wouldn't have to point it out. I didn't realize I was still positioning myself under him. Until the numbers changed. Until the revenue stopped being theoretical. Until the project started paying more than his salary. That's when his tone shifted. Not dramatically, just slightly. And I felt it immediately. The first time he brought it up, it didn't even sound like a request. It sounded like advice. We were at dinner, just the two of us. He asked normal questions at first. Revenue, growth rate, client retention. But this time, he wasn't correcting me. He was calculating. I could see in the pauses, the way he stopped interrupting, the way he leaned back instead of leaning in. And then he said it. You know what this actually needs? I didn't answer. A structure, real leadership, clear authority. Right now it's just you. Just you. It wasn't insulting. It was observational. At least that's how he framed it. He started talking about scalability, decision fatigue, operational inefficiencies, words he'd used his whole life, words that usually made me second-guess myself. And then he said, if we're being honest, this could be a lot bigger. We. That was new. He hadn't used we before. I felt something small in my chest shift. Not pride. Something closer to validation. He saw it now. Finally. But validation from him has always had conditions. I could step in, he said. Calm. Measured. Not as an employee. That wouldn't make sense. I nodded slowly. More like majority partner. He didn't pause before saying the number. 51%. He said it the same way someone says. Pass the salt. No tension. No hesitation. Like it was the logical next step. I actually thought I misheard him. 51. Yeah, he said casually. Someone has to have final say. That's how real companies operate. Real companies. There was again the subtle demotion. What I built wasn't fake, but wasn't real yet. Not until he structured it. I asked what that would look like. He explained it smoothly. He'd optimize operations, make high-level decisions, guide long-term direction. He'd bring his experience. I asked about capital. He said we could figure that out later. I asked about day-to-day work. He said he wouldn't need to be involved in the small stuff. Small stuff. That small stuff was my entire life for the last 2 years. Late nights, risk, stress, clients who almost left, money I almost didn't make. And he wanted majority control without majority sacrifice. But the scary part? I didn't immediately reject it, because he said it in a way that made it feel like I was being offered something. Security, legitimacy, protection from my own blind spots. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, he added. That line hit harder than it should have, because he was right about one thing. I was tired. Running a business alone is isolating. You question everything. Every pricing decision, every hire, every mistake. And when someone who has always sounded confident offers to take the weight off you, it's tempting, even if the cost is control. He framed it like a rescue, like he was stepping in to help his younger brother stabilize something fragile, not like he was acquiring something valuable. And I could feel the old dynamics sliding back into place. Him above, me evaluating whether I deserved to keep what I built. Think about it, he said before leaving. But if we're going to do this, it needs to be majority. Otherwise, it's messy. Messy, meaning I would still have final say. Meaning he wouldn't. I went home that night, replaying the conversation. Not angry, not defensive, just unsettled. Because for the first time, I couldn't tell if he believed I needed him, or if he needed something from me. And the worst part? A small, familiar voice in my head kept whispering. He probably knows better. I didn't respond to him for 3 days. Not because I was offended, because I was negotiating with myself. That's the part people don't see. When someone asks you for something outrageous, you expect anger. But what I felt was confusion. And underneath that guilt, I opened my laptop the next morning and stared at the dashboard. Revenue was consistent. Margins were healthy. Growth was slow but steady. Nothing was collapsing. Nothing was chaotic, but I started looking for cracks anyway. Maybe client retention could be higher. Maybe my pricing model wasn't optimized. Maybe I was one bad quarter away from losing everything. When you've grown up with someone slightly above you, their confidence becomes a reference point, and I could feel mine shrinking. I started replaying the conversation in my head. Someone has to have final say. Was he right? Was I being naive thinking I could run this long-term by myself? Maybe majority ownership isn't about power. Maybe it's about clarity. That's how I rationalized it at first. Then I imagined signing the papers, seeing his name listed above mine. Technically equal, but not really, and I felt something in my chest tighten. Not anger, something closer to regression, like I'd be stepping back into a role I thought I had outgrown. I told myself I was being dramatic. It's just paperwork. Titles don't change relationships, but they do change authority, and authority changes tone. I knew that from experience. Growing up, whenever my parents left us alone, he made the decisions. What movie we watched, what we ate, who got blamed if something broke. It wasn't cruel. It was automatic. He took the lead, and I adjusted. I started noticing something uncomfortable. Every time I imagined us as partners, I didn't see collaboration. I saw correction. I saw him reviewing my decisions, restructuring my team, calling my hires inefficient, telling me I was thinking too small. And the worst part? I saw myself listening. That's what scared me. Not that he would dominate, but that I would let him. I tried talking myself out of that fear. You're not a kid anymore. You built this yourself. You don't need his approval. But approval is addictive when you've chased it your whole life. I thought about family dinners. My parents would love this. Look at you two working together. It would look mature, unified, successful. And if I said no, that unity would fracture. He wouldn't yell. He'd withdraw. He'd become polite, distant, and somehow I'd be the one who made things awkward. That possibility weighed more than 51%. Because saying no to him wasn't just a business decision. It was rewriting a lifelong dynamic. And I wasn't sure I was strong enough to do that without destabilizing everything. Then another thought crept in. If I agree, I don't have to carry it alone anymore. That one hit harder than I expected. Running this company had been isolating. Every mistake was mine. Every late payroll anxiety attack was mine. Every client negotiation was mine. No one to share the blame with. No one to absorb the pressure. If he steps in, the responsibility splits. If something fails, it's not just on me. That idea brought relief. And that relief disgusted me. Because I didn't build this to escape responsibility. I built it to prove I could handle it. To him, to everyone, to myself. And now I was considering giving it back the moment it became heavy. I started drafting numbers on a notepad. If he takes 51%, what happens to profit distribution? How does decision-making work? What happens if we disagree? Every scenario ended the same way. He wins the vote. Not maliciously, just structurally. And structure becomes reality over time. Then he texted me. Have you thought about it? Simple. Calm. No pressure. But I felt pressure anyway. I'm thinking, I replied. His response came fast. Just don't let pride get in the way of growth. That sentence stayed on my screen longer than it should have. Pride. That's how it would be framed. If I declined, I wasn't protecting my work. I was being emotional, small, threatened, and I realized something unsettling. He had already positioned himself as the rational one. If I resisted, I'd look defensive. That's when the doubt shifted. Not about my business, about him. Because if he truly believed in what I built, why did he need control to support it? And why did I feel like I was the one being evaluated? Clarity didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, little memories that started lining up in ways they hadn't before. I kept thinking about the number, 51%. If this was about helping, why that number? Why not 30? Why not 40? Why not equal? Why did support require control? And once that question landed, other memories followed. When I got my first promotion at my old job, he didn't congratulate me. He analyzed it. Title inflation is common in corporate, he said. Just make sure it actually means something. When I bought my first car on my own, he asked about depreciation. When I moved into my apartment, he asked if the neighborhood would hold value. Every milestone I had ever reached went through his filter. Not celebration. Assessment. At the time, I called it practicality. Now I started seeing something else. He didn't attach himself to things until they were proven. And once they were proven, he positioned himself near them. Not to build, to oversee. That's when something uncomfortable surfaced. He had never offered to help when I was struggling. Not when I was working late nights. Not when I was debating quitting. Not when I lost my first major client. But now that the company was stable, Now it needed structure. I replayed the dinner conversation again in my head. He didn't ask what I wanted long-term. He didn't ask what vision I had. He talked about what the company needed, as if it already belonged to something bigger than me. I realized he had skipped one crucial sentence. "I'm proud of you." He never said it. Not once. Instead, he moved straight to optimization. And that's when the pattern snapped into focus. Growing up, he never competed with me when I was behind. He only engaged when I caught up. If I was struggling, he was distant. If I was succeeding, he was involved. Not aggressively, strategically. And I had mistaken that involvement for validation. But it wasn't validation. It was proximity to control. That realization made my stomach drop, because it meant this wasn't about mentorship. It was about hierarchy. He wasn't stepping in to support me. He was stepping in to restore order, the order where he leads. And I adjust. I thought about childhood again. Whenever I try to make independent decisions, what sport to play, what hobby to pursue, he'd offer advice framed as logic. "You're not really built for that. That doesn't suit you. You'll get bored." And most of the time I believed him because he said it calmly. He always says things calmly. No yelling, no insults, just subtle certainty. And subtle certainty is dangerous. It makes you doubt yourself quietly. I looked at my business again, this time differently. Not through fear, through ownership. Every client I landed was through my negotiation. Every mistake I survived was my lesson. Every pivot I made was my decision. It wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was work. Work he wasn't there for. Work he didn't believe in. And now he wanted majority control of something he once called a phase. That's when the emotional fog started lifting. Because if I gave him 51%, I wasn't gaining structure. I was confirming something he had always implied, that I needed supervision, that I was incomplete without him. And the truth was, I wasn't afraid of losing control of the company. I was afraid of losing the illusion that he respected me. That's what had kept me hesitating. But respect doesn't demand majority ownership. Respect doesn't bypass discussion. Respect doesn't assume authority. And once I saw that clearly, the guilt started fading. Not completely, but enough. Enough for a new thought to form. What if this isn't about what he deserves? What if it's about what I allow? That question changed the tone of everything. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking whether I was capable. I was asking whether I was willing to shrink. And that answer came faster than I expected. Once the fog cleared, I didn't feel rage. I felt calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from peace. The kind that comes from clarity. I opened a blank document that night. Not to negotiate. Not to argue. To define. If he wanted ownership, I would give him ownership. Just not the version he imagined. I titled it simply, Equity Participation Agreement. Clean. Professional. Neutral. No emotion in the wording. Because emotion was the trap. I started with 1%. Not symbolic. Intentional. If 51% was about authority, then 1% would reveal motive. Then I built the structure around it. No voting rights. No operational authority. No unilateral decision-making power. No access to company accounts. Equity locked for 3 years. Forfeiture clause if performance metrics weren't met. Capital contribution required upfront. Non-compete agreement enforced for 5 years. Mandatory weekly involvement minimum. Advisory input only. Final decisions reserved for founder. Founder. That word felt different when I typed it. Not younger brother. Not experimenter. Founder. I read it back slowly. It wasn't petty. It wasn't emotional. It was structured. Everything he claimed to value. And that's what made it sharp. Because if he truly believed in real company structure, this was it. Formal. Clear. Accountable. No ambiguity. I imagine his reaction. He would expect negotiation. He would expect discomfort. Maybe even gratitude. He would not expect documentation. But documentation removes hierarchy. It levels things. There's no older brother clause in a contract. Just terms. I didn't send it immediately. I waited a day. Read it again the next morning. Made adjustments. Tightened language. Removed anything that felt reactive. This wasn't revenge. It was definition. Then I attached it to an email. Subject line: proposed structure. No explanation paragraphs. No emotional buildup. Just one sentence. If we're going to do this, it needs to be formal. I stared at the screen for a full minute before pressing send. Not because I was unsure, because I understood what it meant. This wasn't about the 1%. It was about something older than the company. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking him how to structure my decisions. I was presenting mine, and whether he signed it or not, the dynamic had already shifted. He didn't respond that night, and that was the first signal. My brother doesn't sit on things. He evaluates fast, decides fast, speaks fast. Silence from him wasn't normal. It meant something didn't go the way he expected. I slept lightly, not anxious, just alert. The next morning, there was still no reply. No critique of the clauses. No counteroffer. No, this is ridiculous. Just absence. By midday, I caught myself checking my email again. Not because I regretted it, but because some part of me still expected correction. That old reflex doesn't disappear overnight. Around 4 p.m., he called. I answered on the third ring. Hey, he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was restrained. I read the contract. I assumed. A pause. 1%. Yes. And no voting authority? Correct. Another pause. I could hear him recalibrating. This doesn't feel like partnership. It was almost the exact sentence I knew he'd say. Because he wasn't reacting to the percentage. He was reacting to the position. For the first time in our lives, I wasn't negotiating upward toward him. I had set the ceiling. If we're doing this formally, I said evenly, it has to reflect contribution. Silence again. You think I wouldn't contribute? There it was. Not anger. Wounded pride. And that's where this could have turned emotional. I could have started listing the nights he wasn't there. The calls he didn't make. The way he called it a phase. But I didn't. This company existed before you wanted in, I said. And it'll exist either way. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Another long pause. Then he tried a softer angle. I just don't want you limiting yourself. That one almost worked. Because it sounded protective. But protection doesn't require majority ownership. And help doesn't erase the founder. If I ever need guidance, I said, I'll ask for it. That was new. That sentence had weight. Because growing up, I never said that. Guidance was assumed. Offered before requested. And taken. He exhaled slowly. If this is how you see it, maybe it's better we leave it. Not we renegotiate. Not we rethink. We leave it. Which meant he didn't want partnership. He wanted position. We ended the call politely. No raised voices. No dramatic ending. Just a quiet collapse of an assumption. I expected fallout. Family pressure. Side comments. But it came subtly. A few days later, my mom asked me over the phone, casually, so are you two moving forward together? The way she said it made it clear she'd already heard his version. We discussed it, I said. It didn't make sense. She hesitated. He just wants what's best for you. I let that sit. For years, that sentence would have triggered something defensive in me. A need to explain, to justify, to prove I wasn't being stubborn. This time I just said, I know, and left it there. At the next family dinner, nothing was mentioned directly. But dynamics don't need words. They shift in posture, in timing, in who speaks first. He was polite, measured, but different. He didn't dissect my updates, didn't offer unsolicited strategy, didn't correct my phrasing mid-sentence. He listened, which almost felt unfamiliar. And that's when I understood something uncomfortable. The hierarchy between us had never been enforced. It had been volunteered. By me. Every time I softened my wins. Every time I deferred. Every time I asked for evaluation instead of speaking with certainty. I had kept him above me because that position felt stable. Predictable. Safe. Letting go of that wasn't triumphant. It was destabilizing. Because once the older brother pedestal disappears, you don't just lose authority. You lose the illusion that someone above you is watching, protecting, approving. Weeks turned into months. The company kept growing. Steady, healthy, not explosive, but real. And he stopped asking about ownership entirely. No follow-up. No renegotiation. Just distance. We still talk, but less. Not hostile, just thinner. Conversations don't linger. Advice isn't automatic. And something else never happened. He never said he was proud of me. Not before the contract. Not after. And that's the part one had to sit with. Because if I'm honest, a small part of me hoped the boundary would earn that sentence. Like maybe once I stood firm, he'd see me differently. Respect me. Acknowledge it. But boundaries don't manufacture validation. They just remove dependency. And I realized something harder than losing 51%. I wasn't protecting my company. I was letting go of the idea that I needed him to approve of me. That was the real shift. Not ownership. Not percentages. Independence. And independence is quiet. There was no dramatic confrontation. No final speech. No victory lap. Just a new normal. He doesn't stand above me anymore. But he doesn't stand behind me either. We stand separately, which is healthier, but also lonelier. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd agreed. If I'd signed away control to keep the comfort. Maybe dinners would feel warmer. Maybe he'd feel closer. Maybe I'd still be chasing the same approval I've chased my entire life. But the company wouldn't be mine, and neither would the growth. Because the contract wasn't about humiliating him. It was about proving something to myself. That I could hold something valuable without handing it over to feel safe. He asked for 51%. I offered 1%. But what I really did was stop offering myself. And he's never brought it up again. Not the percentage. Not the contract. Not the decision. But he also doesn't correct me mid-sentence anymore. And I think that says enough.